Today is the last Accel clan that's going to be introduced in Standard, at least for now. And you might say they're gonna save the last for best.
Stand up! Vanguard!
Hey Cardfighters, welcome back to another deck profile, and today we're gonna cover none other than Narukami, the latest Accel clan that is introduced with the Miyaji Academy Cardfight Club set. That's a mouthful, and probably the last Accel clan that we're going to get in Standard if they're not going to introduce a new clan. That I probably am not thinking that they're going to do that. So this is probably the last Accel clan that we're going to see. And this is a very interesting Accel clan that combines the control aspect with multi-attacking in a sense, but with their own little plot twist around it and their own kind of way to accelerate some advantages on the field. And we're gonna see in this deck profile that they can do that in quite a lot of different ways, and they have a lot of different things and tricks up their sleeve to basically come on top in most matchups. And after this video, you're gonna see why it is doing pretty well in Japan at the moment. And I can definitely see why it is the case, as it takes all the good stuff of a powerful Accel clan, but also the aspect of Kagerou's control to a whole nother level that can circumvent some annoying cards like Promise Daughter, for example. Well, without further ado, let's jump right into this list. You know the drill, the timetables is right around here, and let's jump right into this list as we have enough things to talk about for this Narukami deck profile, as seen as this is the first one for Narukami.
For this Narukami deck list, we run a total of 9 grade 3s, 11 grade 2s, 13 grade 1s and 17 grade 0s. For a precise list, we run 4 copies of Dragonic Dragon. This is our main key card that allows us to put out enormous pressure with the Vanguard attacks by restanding, and also helps us by binding stuff from our opponent. And it enables us to do some multi-attacking shenanigans or mid-battle shenanigans that our opponent might not anticipate it when we are resolving skills in order. For the support grade 3s, we run 3 copies of Dragonic Dragon. This is the perfect first ride, as it has a kind of mini break ride skill built into it, and it is an amazing Vanguard card as well as a rearguard card that allows us to bind stuff, and it is a gigantic beat stick that our opponent has to deal with. And lastly, we run 2 copies of Great Composure Dragon. This is just an amazing card. We have seen it in the anime. It has great offensive capabilities as well as defensive capabilities, in that your opponent either need to force cards from their hand onto the field or make some weird attacking units or columns to reduce the power of this card. And also against Accel, this thing is amazing when they are down on resources and they cannot fill those extra front row circles, and then defending will be quite easy with this card. For a grade 2 lineup, we run 4 copies of Dragonic Deathscythe. This is one of the key grade 2 cards that can either bind cards from our opponent's field from the front row, but it can also put out pressure against our opponent that it can gain power if they do not fill out the field. And it can also cheat out some easy power, if you call it, to an Accel circle against a non-Accel clan, or even against another Accel player, as they first need to generate 2 Accel circles before they can call it in the same column. So you can cheese out some easy targets and easy power with it. For the other grade 2, we run 4 copies of Recklessness Dragon. It is pretty similar to Dragonic Deathscythe, only this one costs Counter Blast instead of the 2 Soul Blasts, and it can also gain the power when you do that, but it can also gain power if the front row isn't completely filled. So it's also a nice beat stick in that. And lastly, we run 3 copies of Dusty Plasma Dragon, and this is a great card that can generate a lot of power to the field if you have a full column where this is in and you bind something from your opponent. Likewise, you're gonna bind basically every turn, or at least you're gonna try to bind every turn at least 1 unit. So you can predict that when this thing is on the field, every turn it will gain either the 5k, but in most cases you want to make it generate 10k. For grade 1s, we of course run 4 copies of Rising Phoenix. This is one of the best cards in the clan that it has currently, and there's really no reason why you shouldn't run 4 cards. The more the merrier, actually. And it can be 3 pluses, definitely 3 pluses against control clans, even against Shadow Paladin. This is almost a card that can generate an insta win for you in some scenarios, if you are fast enough to get these cards. and it can just make some insane combinations with your Detonix Drill Dragon, as you can generate multi-attacking in the right situation. We run 3 copies of Lizard Soldier Riki, and this is a great support card that allows us to either clear their front row to move the units to the back row, if they aren't on Accel circles at least, or we can move back row units to the front row to kill them, so we don't have to discard that many cards with the Detonix Drill Dragon. So depending on your scenario, this card can really help you in a pinch. For the other grade 1, we run 3 copies of Dragonic Dancer Regina. This is a great card to make some numbers, and it also fills your soul as soon as she goes into the soul, so it helps with multiple things that the deck has issues with. But the 3 units getting 5k is really amazing, and under the right circumstances, this thing can give you games. We also run 2 copies of Lightning of Hope Helena. This is your countercharger, but you're not gonna run that many in this deck, and I think 2 is fine, as soon as she can stay on the field, so you can use 1 card and get multiple countercharges from it off, if you're lucky. But the fact that it's really restricted, I don't think you have that much value to run 4 copies, so I am running only 2 of it. And lastly, for grade 1 spot, I run 1 tech card, and that is Scathing Electric Spear Ramzi. This is basically for some insane combos that you can do with Detonix Drill Dragon. I've talked about it in the set review of Narukami, and I only run 1 as soon as you're likely not going to use it in most games, but if it comes up and you can put this thing on the field, it can generate a lot of pressure against your opponent, as they might have issues with some cards that might show up during the turns that this thing is on the field. And it can give you games even when those games you shouldn't actually have won, but you've been lucky, and thanks to this card that can happen. And for grade 0s, we of course run the starter Spark Kid Dragoon, the generic V starter, and for the trigger lineup, we run 4 heals, 8 crits, and 4 draws. I don't really like the front trigger aspect in this deck, as soon as we don't really multi-attack that much, and every attack needs to count, so crit triggers do it more for me in these kinds of decks of Accel, as the attacks are generally a little bit higher. They can still hit after defense trigger, so pushing them to high damage early on is much more important than letting every attack be powerful. So this deck list makes a total of 9 grade 3s, 11 grade 2s, 13 grade 1s, and 17 grade 0s. Narukami is relative one-dimensional in gameplay. You place cards, you bind rear guards, you place cards, and swap cards in the front row, then you place cards and bind some more rear guards. And sometimes you get some extra bonus effects out of binding units. But even though that's the case for the current Narukami builds, this deck does have 2 interesting combos to play. First off, we can multi-attack, and no, I do not mean that because we are an Accel clan. No, we can generate more attacks out of thin air by just attacking. How, you ask? Well, simple. It's a neat little interaction between Detonix Drill Dragon and Rising Phoenix. If we have a filled field like so, we can attack 4 times and then attack with the Vanguard. And by resolving Detonix Drill skill, we bind at the rear guard, meaning we have triggered Rising Phoenix drop zone skill. And we then can call them to the field, and that's also before the drive check, so we can stack triggers onto these new units. And by doing so, we created 4 extra attacks for free. A total of 10 attacks for the cost of a single counterblast. The other interaction also revolves around Detonix Drill Dragon, but this time we use Scathing Electric Spear Ramzi. This one works as follows. We attack with the Vanguard and use its skill to restand. We put all the crit triggers we got onto the rearguard, so it becomes a powerhouse, and then we attack with the rearguard. Afterwards, we attack with the Vanguard, this time boosted, and at the end of the battle, we resolve Ramzi's skill to restand that rearguard with the crits. Now we attack once again with that unit to seal the deal to our opponent. Another nice interaction is that when you bind something and you have a Dusty Plasma Dragon on the field and a Rising Phoenix in a drop zone, you can call Rising Phoenix to the column of Plasma Dragon and then resolve its skill to give the column a 10k increase, making the column 30k. Resources in this deck are very tight. You use them for almost everything, but you can hardly get them back. Counterblast will be used mainly to bind your opponent's front row units, but Detonix Drill also enables a restanding Vanguard, so by default that card has the most value behind its skill. We also have Ramzi, but that's only for those special occasions where everything aligns perfectly. Soul is also a thing that's pretty hard to come by. We have a lot of cards that use it, and although Stinger doesn't have a Soul Blast cost, it removes itself from the Soul, so keep in mind that it's also a minus on your Soul count. Luckily, we have some cards that goes into the Soul that also gives us some positive effects, so try to balance everything to the best of your potential. Keep in mind, you don't have to use every unplace effect of every card, because we probably don't have the means to pay for every skill. Anyways, it's sometimes just good to place down those cards as a beat stick to pressure out your opponent to put out more cards on the field. Last thing to take a look at is Lightning of Hope Helena. She enables us to turn a Soul Blast into a Counterblast, but only if we already used our last Counterblast and that we binded something. And that means we can only use this card after we use either one of these cards, but Deathscythe is pretty unrealistic as the total cost would be 3 Soul Blasts. So try to have an Helena on the field when you're going to use your last Counterblast to have at least some resources left for next turn. This deck focuses on removing advantage from your opponent, all the while you are getting more tempo and building even more advantage yourself. The main strategy is to call units that bind units so you can win by out-tempoing them, but there are more to this deck than meets the eye. In most cases, you only want to place your unplace effects only when you can activate their skills. However, this isn't always the best idea, because 1, it's easy to play around, your opponent just won't call any units, meaning you will miss your early aggro, what Accel's all about, especially against force. And second, you probably can't use all your skills anyways, with the limited resources to your disposal. So don't be afraid to call units to the field to pressure out some cards from your opponent. And next turn, you can bite those units anyways. While we're on the topic of limited resources, you might want to tag front row rearguards instead of binding everything, because you can't keep up with binding everything in the long run. As seen as binding gives you more advantage with other units, it's best to save our resources when you can also activate those skills. Great Composure Dragon is an ideal Vanguard against other Accel decks that have issue with filling their circles. The moment you can clear their front row, then this can be a card that almost saves a ton of cards if they have 2 to 3 Accel circles, and seen as this card can be a potential 27 to 23k base without any defensive triggers, can highly like in a scenario that they cannot hit you anymore. Riki is a great card to either give Great Composure more power or to target pesky back row units. This can also trigger other units that rely on relative empty front row. Correct timing of this card is crucial, as seen as it casts Soul Blast, but beside that doesn't really remove something from your opponent's advantage. Seen as Rising Phoenix can come back from the drop zone, it's important to try to make the most out of it. Guard with it from your hand, target it with Shattered Retire effects, place it in the front row to bait attacks, etc, etc, etc. On to the deck options. For a Great Freeze, well, if you really want, you can tag in Vermilion, but as it stands, I'm still not convinced it has a place in this deck. For Great Twos, you have a bit more options. Thunderstorm Dragoon, Temposius Domineer Wyvern, and Full Great Foil Dragon all have their own merit in running over the other cards. Depending on your playstyle, you can go with any of them if you want. For Great Ones, I can only think of Demolition Dragon as a potential alternative option, and of course you can change the current lineup if you aren't a fan of Ramzi, for example. Triggers is also up to debate, but as seen as this clan doesn't really multi-tag in its own nature, means that crit triggers holds way more value in my opinion than anything else. This is the last Accel deck that was introduced in Standard, and it is an interesting one. It's Control plus Aggro Temple, and that is completely new for the reboot. This deck does suffer from the usual issues that come with Accel, but thanks to cards like Stinger and Rising Phoenix, this won't have to be always the case, as seen as they can fill the board quite easily. That together with all the bindings makes this deck one of the strongest Accel decks out there.
And with that, we'll conclude this deck profile for Narukami, and it is an amazing deck in my honest opinion. I like it a lot, and I'm probably gonna pick it up when it's going to be released in English format, as I already played Narukami in the G era, and I really liked Vanquisher with the binding stuff and all those mechanics around it that you're gonna accelerate towards something with their Thunderstrike numbers. And this new Standard approach has the same kind of feeling to it. and the way that you can multi-attack, but also more powerful and more impressive kind of playstyle than just blindly attacking with Nova Grappler and Acroforce are excelling. So I'm very hyped for this deck. I'm very excited to play it when we finally get it in the English format. It's still quite some time left. I believe 6 weeks, one and a half months, about 6 weeks, because in 2 weeks we get the Answer of Truth, so it seems about right. But that's about everything that I can go over today. If you are interested in the other decks that you can build with this set, so the other Oracle Think Tank, the Nubatama set, the Gold Paladin cards, then why not subscribe to the channel and hitting the bell button below, as we're gonna cover all those kinds of builds. Do you want to play a Witches deck? Got you covered. Do you want to play Mages? Also got you covered. Soul Saver? We got it. So stay tuned for all those videos. We're gonna cover it all. But as always, guys, I'm Mr. Time Leap, and I'll see you guys in the next one.